Hey everyone, this is D&D Lounge, another episode of How to Use D&D Spells, a series where I cover spells from the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. I look at some of the spell's most common uses, answer a few rules questions, and give my opinion on how good a spell is and who it's for. Today I'm talking about Pass Without Trace, the super stealthy spell that turns your whole party into ninjas. Here's a spell's description and the classes who can cast it. The spell provides a plus 10 bonus to stealth checks for allies within 30 feet of the caster, including the caster. It also makes it impossible to track affected creatures except by magical means. Finally, a creature affected by Pass Without Trace leaves no trace of their passage. It's always great to see a well-named D&D spell. Alright, with that covered, let's get into a few of the top ways to use Pass Without Trace in-game. Tip number 1 is to help unstealthy party members be sneaky. The number one beneficiary of a plus 10 stealth modifier is the paladin with heavy armor who's already suffering disadvantage on stealth checks. The party's rogue is probably fine without it. The point is that Pass Without Trace is most impactful when you use it as a party-wide buff to help get the normally non-stealthy players past the stealthy part of the adventure. As a reminder, group checks only require half the group to succeed. Another good use of Pass Without Trace is to scout ahead. Druids and rangers already make good scouts in natural environments. Pass Without Trace just amplifies that strength. If you don't want to commit the whole party to scouting, you can have a go alone and be sure you'll leave no trace back to your party when you return. Which brings me to use number 3 of the spell, which is prevent your party from being followed. Players often underrate the leave no trace portion of the spell, but it's powerful. Not many enemies can track you with magical means, so you're usually guaranteed to put off pursuers with Pass Without Trace. Just be sure to move fast and or recast the spell after an hour, depending on how doggedly you're being pursued. Another related use of the spell is for escape. Whether you're locked in a crooked warden's prison or trapped in a necromancer's lair, there are some times when you really want to get out of dodge without a combat encounter breaking out. As a bonus, if you succeed in escaping without a fight, your enemies won't be able to figure out where you went without the help of a spell like Locate Creature or Scrying. Use number 5 of the spell is Thievery, which may not be the first thing that comes to mind when most people consider the naturey classes of Ranger and Druid, but it's actually great in urban environments where guards and tracking hounds are a likely response to theft. Just make sure you stay out of sight because no stealth check in the world can save you from running straight into the guard captain. Unless, of course, you use tip number 6, which is to pair this spell with invisibility. This is an expensive option and one that requires a second spellcaster since both spells require concentration. But with invisibility, you can attempt to hide in plain sight, and with Pass Without Trace, you're very likely to succeed on this attempt. And as a final tip, protect your concentration. If there's a chance of running into traps or other environmental damage as you sneak around, do your best to avoid it. If another party member can eat the damage for you, ask them nicely to do so. Even a small fall has a chance of breaking your concentration, which is a real bummer for a second-level, hour-long, party-wide buff. Pass Without Trace is great at what it does, but it's not without its misunderstandings. Let's cover a few common rules questions that come up around the spell. Rule number 1 is that you cannot hide in plain sight. No matter how well you roll on a stealth check or what your modifier is, no visible creature can hide in plain sight. Rule number 2 is it only benefits creatures currently within 30 feet of the caster. So if an ally moves out of range, even for a moment, they lose a stealth bonus and might possibly leave a trace behind or be momentarily detectable by non-magical means. Rule number 3 is you can instantly confer benefits to anyone who enters the spell's range, regardless of whether it's your turn. Here's sage advice confirmation. Rule number 4 is that Pass Without Trace doesn't conceal your current location. This is a little contentious, but by definition, a trace is something left behind by something that's past, not something that's currently there. So if you smell really bad and a creature with keen smell is around, they still have a pretty good shot detecting you as you pass near them. And rule number 5 is that the spell doesn't create obscurity or make you invisible. When the spell's description says that a veil of shadows and silence radiates from you, that's just flavor text. You don't actually walk around with magical darkness or magical silence following you. Those are just a few of the common rules questions that come up around Pass Without Trace. Let me know if you have any other questions about the spell's rules in the comments below. Alright, so that's how Pass Without Trace works and a few ways to use it. Now let's turn to the important question. Is it a good spell, worthy of your second level spell slot? My answer is yes, Pass Without Trace is definitely a good spell. A plus 10 modifier of any kind is unheard of in the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. In fact, new DMs are often left scratching their heads at the power level of this lower tier spell. Just remember, while plus 10 on stealth checks means you and your party are much more likely to sneak past enemies, this isn't actually a god mode on par with 100% Chameleon in Oblivion, for example. Sometimes you just can't sneak by enemies since they're actively watching the only point of entry, and it might not always be possible or wise to keep all of your party members within 30 feet of the caster. All that is just to confirm that Pass Without Trace is definitely great, but not overpowered. It's just an excellent spell for any party in any campaign. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you found this guide on Pass Without Trace helpful. If you have any stories about using Pass Without Trace in your own Dungeons & Dragons game, please share them in the comments below. This is D&D Lounge wishing you the best of luck in your next spellcasting venture.